We are live.
Great. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Google Hangout. We're going to talk about anything you want to talk about. For a starting point, we're going to talk about the discussion topic, which is a tough one. Talking about the right to die. Should people have that right to die? What should be the constraints on that right to die? And I read through the discussion forum this morning, or through much of it, and what really struck me was how many incredibly interesting and open and vulnerable and really moving ideas that people shared, including some of their own personal experiences. And so as we go into this, I just want everyone to remember to take care of yourself, to take care of others, try and be respectful, and be caring about, let's be caring about each other. The reality is, in my opinion, there is no one answer to any of the questions that I posed. And I posed them not so that we can come up with an answer, because I actually don't believe that an answer exists, but so that we can talk about it, and we can talk about it from using a neurobiological perspective. So with that preamble, I'm going to give it back to Emily for just one moment so you can understand a little bit about how this thing works, this technology works, which I don't understand. So, Emily, and then we'll come back and we'll start our discussion. Emily? I can't hear you for some reason, Emily.
Are we good now?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we tried to be a little more organized this time. So I just want to mention a few quick things. The first is that you can ask us questions via the Q&A on the Google Plus event page. We've tried to post this link pretty much everywhere. It's on the Coursera thread, it's on Twitter, and it was sent out in an email blast. So this is the Google Plus event page. There's a little Q&A button in the top right corner of this page where you can go and ask questions. You can also ask questions by tweeting at myself or the professor. We have both our Twitter handles down below our names, so I'll be watching that on Twitter, and if I see a question, I'll add it in. If you want to join the broadcast, there is a link to a Google form. Both Peggy and myself have this spreadsheet open, so if any new student names pop in, we will try to invite you. We can only have 10 people in the broadcast at once. So we're going to try to manage this as best as we can, and we'll see how it goes. So back to Peggy.
Okay, so great. First of all, I have to say I'm so excited because finally I am seeing some faces that I feel like I know you. For instance, Gordon, I know you. But now I get to see your face. Alexis. There's somebody here that doesn't have a name on, so I don't particularly know who you are. But anyway, I'm really excited to hear what you all have to say. And I just want to reiterate what I said a moment ago, which is, let's all take care. Take care of yourself. Take care of others. This is a very emotional and personal discussion. There are no answers, in my opinion, and we're here to have a respectful discussion. So let's get started. Alexis, do you want to start with talking about how you thought about this topic?
Well, whenever I think about right to die or euthanasia, my own background, my own cultural upbringing, religious upbringing, has kind of drilled into me to be against it. But as I consider the topic and consider my opinion on it, I don't think that it is reasonable for me to consider telling someone that they have a terminal illness and their quality of life is diminishing greatly, that they can't have that choice. So I approached my discussion response in that, and it brought up a question for me of using the skydiving for depression. Would it be possible to activate the parasympathetics and the sympathetics in the same way for people with other types of terminal illness? I'm just curious, do you think that it would have the same effect that it seems to have for some people who have depression and they go skydiving and they're jolted out of their depression?
My idea is that a lot of people in the forum were talking about the difference between jumping off a bridge to kill yourself and jumping out of a plane to go skydiving. In one instance, there would be surprise at surviving, and in the other instance, there's an expectation that you're going to survive. Whether that's 100% warranted or not is a different matter. But and people talked about that, and I agree totally that expectation. If you know you're doing something just for practice, for a moment in time, and you're going to get rescued out of it, that has a very different feeling and probably engages different brain circuits than when you don't. But on the other hand, I think the bigger difference probably is the brain that is doing the two different types of jumps. So the depressed brain versus a healthy brain. And my suspicion is, as many people have pointed out, both on my blog and in the forums, a depressed brain it's a different beast than a healthy, I love life kind of brain, and so it may be it may be more difficult to jolt that out of depression. The idea to go skydiving is obviously a provocative idea, not particularly a realistic one, and a lot of people talked about the use of virtual skydiving, and I think that even exacerbates the difference between, say, jumping off a bridge and skydiving. So if you're doing virtual skydiving, there is going to be a huge rush. I've been to IMAX, and as you fly over some river, or as you perceive you are flying over some river, there is some fear, but it's not going to be to the same degree as when your body is in fact in that state. Emily, do you want to choose a question? We're getting lots of questions, which is great. Thanks to everybody.
Yeah, let's do a question. Okay. Now, did you have a particular one in mind, or do you want me to?
Well, no, because I'm talking, I can't read at the same time. So that's
okay.
Why I'm
Okay.
This one.
Okay. Perhaps you can talk about, this is one question on whether the depression would come back or not. So they're saying if depression is cured by skydiving or something that boosts the usage of the sympathetic nervous system, then when the depression come back? And when they think about that bad thing again, like, how does this? What are the longer-term effects of this, do you think?
Right, and I think that people made the distinction, which is a really apt one, between what you can call situational depression. My cat died, and I'm really bummed out. I'm really unhappy about that. Versus, there are many things that have made me depressed, and now I'm in this situation where I can't see any light. I cannot get myself out. A more clinical type depression. And you know why we're having so much feedback, Emily?
Yeah, Julie, can you just mute your microphone for a moment?
Okay, so
wait, when you go to have your question, Julie, you can unmute yourself. But for now, if everyone can keep their microphone muted.
Okay, so the situational depression is something that presumably you could get out of, and it might stick. Whereas the clinical depression, a really depression where there's just no light at the end of the tunnel, that's going to be harder to get out of, and probably the effects of any intervention are going to be more time delimited. They're going to be shorter. That would be my expectation.
Oh wait, there. I think we got the
Yeah,
feedback worked out. Yeah.
Let me say one more thing about that. It just reminds me there was a recent on Facebook on the Understanding the Brain Facebook page. There was a recent somebody recently posted about a treatment for Alzheimer's disease where they basically this is in mice. Okay, so in a model of Alzheimer's disease that's present in mice, and they have these aggregates, these tangles and plaques, and they basically take ultrasonic waves and they do away with these plaques. They dissolve them essentially. And first of all, I'm not really sure. I personally, well, I actually am sure. I personally would not want my brain to be ultrasonically. But even more so, then, as this question brings up, get rid of the plaques, but you haven't gotten rid of the cause, and the plaques will come back. They'll reform. And so, yes, if you can treat a depression, what's to tell you that it's gonna be a lasting, it's gonna have a lasting effect? And even in the traditional medical treatment of depression, a common thing that happens is that a drug works for a while and then it stops working, and then the physician diagnoses or prescribes a different drug, and then that works for a while, and so on. So these things are not necessarily, treatments are not necessarily getting at cures. There are almost no treatments that do get at cures. And so what you're doing is you're treating it for a while, but you are, as this person, as Ayush mentions, you're not treating the cause, the original cause.
Okay, while we have Anna in here, Anna, are you with us? Can we hear you?
I was muted. Yes, I am.
Okay, awesome. We'll go do your question then. I'll select it in the Q&A, and if you want to introduce the question or any other topics you'd like to speak about, that would be perfect.
Okay. So you're just pulling up the one that I already posted?
Yeah, so this is the one you entered into the Q&A, but you can introduce it yourself if you'd like to elaborate, or...
Okay. In Peggy's article, she mentions electric convulsive therapy, and after learning about the meninges and just the fact that the brain is so delicate that it's encased in so many different layers and floated in fluid and then a skull, a lot of people say, a lot of psychiatrists say that ECT doesn't cause brain damage, or if it does, it's only temporary. And the brain damage is what's held there. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of conflicting information, and I was wondering what a neurobiologist opinion is on ECT, on whether it causes damage.
So that is a great question. There's a couple of different parts to the answer. The first is a direct answer. So my impression is that ECT causes memory loss. So that it looks like it's affecting the hippocampal function in some way. I don't think that it really disrupts the meninges. I don't think there's any evidence that it does. Maybe it does, but there's certainly no strong evidence. But a very common accompaniment of or result of ECT is a impairment in limbic function, and most notably in short-term memory, in making memories.
Okay.
But a longer view of the question is, so why would you do ECT, and why is ECT still done? And the answer is, and does it work because we know how it works? No, we do not know how ECT works. It is possible that it works because it somehow drives the sympathetic system. We don't know. We do not know. It's a black box treatment essentially, where this has been tried on people with severe depression, where drugs have not helped. Psychotherapy has not helped. All available treatments have been tried and the person's still not, has not been able to come back to themselves. And in that situation, if you then try ECT, oftentimes it does help. Does it make the person who they were beforehand? Probably not, but it provides some light at the end of that tunnel. And this is on average. Does it work for every person? Is it worth it for every person? These are questions that individuals will have to answer for themselves. And my hunch is, from what I've read, is that for some people it worked and it was worth it, and for some people it worked and was not worth it. Worked on the depression, but the side effects such as memory loss and certain other affective changes were not worth it. And then there's another group for whom it did not work at all.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, we use, or medicine uses all manner of treatments that they don't understand the mechanism for. And ECT is one of those.
You know, I wonder, it's like an oversimplification of depression into just one person may be depressed, another may be depressed, they're suffering from postpartum syndrome.
Right. So, I agree. Most of the neuropsychiatric diseases, there is no evidence, and I think most people would agree that they are not homogeneous disorders.
Mm-hmm.
So is there one schizophrenia? Probably not. Is there one version of obsessive-compulsive disorder, or is there one version of depression, or is there one version of bipolar? I think assuredly not. And the same goes with depression. Okay, so Emily, you were going to move to who?
Yes, so Luke has a question. Don't know this well. So Luke.
Hi, can you hear me okay? I can
hear you, yeah.
Okay, terrific. Thanks for letting me ask the question. When the original question was posed, okay, sorry, I'm getting major echo feedback. Answering that.
Anna, you may be fighting the echo.
Right. So if you're not talking, turn off your mic, which I'm about to do.
There we go. Okay, I think we're golden now.
Okay, I'll try again. So when the initial question was posed, and that's actually much better now. When the original question was posed, I started thinking about something a little bit similar. I've seen experiments about time dilation with people in free fall and how that's changed perspective on the passing of time and actually the capability of being able to perceive time through thresholds that's not possible through other circumstances. Any thoughts on any relationship between any sort of localized areas between with the question you posed, or are we talking about two completely separate things?
That's a great question, Luke. And the reality is I have never thought about time dilation. I don't know very much about it. What I would say is I've actually been really fascinated by how our brain counts time, how it measures time, and I've seen some consideration of it, but I think the jury is still out on that whole field.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Okay, Julie has a question now.
Hello, Professor Peggy. Finally glad I could meet you online.
I know, it's very nice to see you, Julie.
Well, Professor Peggy, I am glad I could be a part of this discussion. I had one question for you.
Peggy, you may want
basically.
Go ahead, Juliet. I hear you.
Oh, okay. Basically, Wilder Penfield had famously said that no brain is better than bad brain.
No brain is better than bad brain.
Yeah. Yes. So what if if we cure these patients, we end up having a patient like SM, disinhibited but too brave for their own good.
Well, okay, Juliet. So
Peggy, do you just want to repeat the question real quick?
yes. So this is what I understood the question to be. That Wilder Penfield said something to the effect that no brain is better than a bad brain. Is that right, Juliet? Yeah. Okay. So no brain is not going to work. So that's a little bit of an extreme. But let's take a situation where we can compare none to impaired, and that's a cerebellum. So there are patients that have no cerebellum, and there are patients that have a damaged cerebellum. Now, which one works? Which one works better? And if it's a severely damaged cerebellum, so let's take the situation, the cerebellums of the people that walk on all fours. If some of you may be familiar of that story from last year, from last time's MOOC. This is a family of individuals from Turkey who have a hypoplasia. They have a very small cerebellum, and as a result, they have very poor balance, and for a variety of reasons, that they're in a very rural part of Turkey for a variety of reasons that are very much include this very bad cerebellum. They ended up walking on all fours as opposed to walking upright. And they have a number of other less well described cognitive deficits. And so the deficits that these people face are ones that come from the cerebellum not working well, both during development and during adulthood. Now, take in contrast to that, there have been 2 cases in the last year that have come to some attention of people born with no cerebellum. It's not just a little cerebellum, it's none. One of them was an individual who came to the attention of physicians in China. She had no cerebellum. She was 23 years old, married with a child. So she was functioning. They did say in the article does not have a huge amount of detail about her abilities, her capacities, or her disabilities, but she was a late developer. That much is clear in the report. But she went to see the physician until she was in her 20s. So how bad could it have been? And then there's a case that just came out on NPR of a young man here in the United States who also has no cerebellum, and he also was delayed developmentally, but when you talk to him, he's delightful. What's interesting about that report is that he's able to talk about his problems with emotional interactions, social interactions, probably due to his lack of having a cerebellum while he was developing. So the idea is that when the cerebellum is gone awry, it's giving the rest of the nervous system a bad message. And what can you do with a bad message? You can't make it into a good message. Whereas with no cerebellum, what the individuals are able to do is they're able to accomplish what the cerebellum does, that cerebellar transform. That's accomplished by some other part of the brain, probably the cerebral cortex. It's a clumsy way to do it. It doesn't work perfectly, but it certainly works pretty darn well, because there's nothing hugely wrong with either of the 2 patients that have come to light of late, who have no cerebellum. So I think not having something is better than having it giving you bad information. Of course, there are other situations. I'd rather have a poor retina, a retina that I'd rather have actually the eyes that I have, which are not great, but I'd rather have them than none. So it depends on the part of the brain, and I guess there's a case to be made for each possibility.
Okay, Professor Peggy, I heard your answer. And I'll just say that your answer reminded me of the words of Susan Sontag, who studied, as everyone knows, studied at the University of Chicago. She said, famously, Mark, that the best answers are those that destroy the questions. So I think your answers are kind of like, they're detailed, and I thank you for answering them. And just as a discussion for the next form, if you would like to take it up, I was reading an article by David Eagleman in the Atlantic, and he was talking about patients who were brought to the courts, and it was later discovered that they had brain injuries. Yet they were sentenced sometimes to death even. One of the famous examples is of a shooter in the University of Austin, Texas, and it was later discovered that he had written a suicide note, and it was later, upon when post-mortem was done, that there was a tumor in the brain. So do you think that the legal system should take into account these patients with tumors? Because there are a lot of examples. I even read a book on the history of neuroscience. It was by Sam Keen, The Tale of the Dueling Neurosurgeons, and he highlighted a lot of patients who had brain tumors, yet the legal system did not take that into account, and these people were sentenced. Is it unfair? Should there be some redress for this? Thank you.
Julie, this is such an interesting question. So let's frame it as, what is the role of neuroscience in determining culpability for our actions? Are they our actions? Is it our damaged brain talking? If it's our damaged brain talking, does that take away our personal responsibility? This was a question that we actually considered in the final discussion forum of the first session of this course, and we will for sure revisit the question. I'm not going to offer an opinion because, to be quite honest, I flip-flop. There are cases where it's pretty clear to me that the person's not responsible, and cases where it's pretty clear to me that the person is responsible, and then there's this huge gray zone where I just don't know. I think it's definitely worthwhile having the discussion. We're not going to do that. We're not going to focus on that today, but we will come back to that probably in the last week, just because it's such a robust discussion.
If you'll excuse me for interrupting as well, it occurs to me that a couple of huge tie-ins for parenting.
Maggie, would you just like to repeat your question real quick?
It was just a comment on the discussion we're having about culpability and what we should do about things. The developmental levels that children hit at different times means we have to parent them different. And so your role, you're talking about how people are culpable in terms of the penal system also ties into how parents are parenting and what level their children are at developmentally and how we understand that. So I think there's huge roles for neurobiology in understanding that. So I just wanted to tie that in. I've been all week doing a course in Denver at the Sensory Processing Foundation, and they do a lot of research there, top-notch research about just how we sensory process, and which is a huge tie-in to children understanding the world.
Peggy, you have to unmute yourself. So you're the culprit.
Sorry. Okay. Maggie, it's a great point, and I totally agree. It's such an interesting topic to extend it to how parents should judge their kids as responsible or not responsible for being bad kids. That's I thank you. I wrote it down because I really like that point. We'll definitely include it, and it also it reminds me also not just young kids and how they process the outside world, but also adolescence. And in adolescence, there is this emerging picture that the sort of the risk-taking circuitry is more robustly developed than is the oversight circuitry. This is a field that Frances Jensen has written a book on, and I'm in the midst of, well, it's in my lineup, so I'm going to read it soon and hopefully have something to offer on that topic as well.
Okay, we have a question from April now. When and if it loads. April, you'll have to unmute your microphone. April,
Why don't you read it out? Emily, why don't you read it out?
It's not on the Q&A. She came through the event page.
Okay.
April, at the top, there should be an icon.
Let's come back to April.
April, if you want to type your question in the chat, I'll read it out afterwards. Awesome. Okay. We will do one from one. And Peggy, next time we're going to give you a pair of headphones. Okay, here is one. Is there a safe way to boost the usage of the sympathetic nervous system to cure depression with drugs? This could act in a similar way to skydiving, but I assume they mean it would be pharmacological.
Yeah, I don't think you really want to go whole hog on your sympathetic system pharmacologically. That'd be extremely dangerous. You're talking about getting your heart rate way high, getting your blood pressure way high, and there's a reason why we maintain homeostasis, because letting our body go outside of the range of homeostasis is something that's going to be detrimental to our health, either acutely and or eventually. So we do not want a person in a whole sympathetic, a state of extreme sympathetic activation. No more than we want them in a state of extreme parasympathetic activation, which would be a shutdown. So we really want to be somewhere in the middle. There are situations where we engage the sympathetic system in an area. So, for instance, you can make a nerve block that will engage the sympathetic system in the hand or in the arm, but you would not want to do that, particularly with the heart.
I'm adding some people. I'm inviting some people in real quick. Did April post her question in the chat? Do you want to read that out while I invite some people?
I don't see April. So here's one. How would you know that you were suffering from depression even without consulting a clinical psychologist? Is there also a tendency for our brain to trick us into thinking we have depression when we have prolonged sadness, or the other way around? And I think the answer is if you're worried about it, I would go see somebody, whether it's a psychologist or some kind of a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist. It's not. look at that. Look at who's made an appearance. That's Gree, by the way. Okay, hi Gree. But I think that we perhaps underestimate how severe and how potentially dangerous depression is. And so if you had a big gash in your arm, would you go see a physician? Yeah, you probably would. So if you feel as though you may be depressed more than the norm, or the depression just can't lift, or there's a good reason for your depression, but it still feels just overwhelming, why not? Why not go see somebody and check out whether it is or not? There's really a lot of good reasons to seek help and no good reason not to. That would be my answer to that. Okay. So.
Okay, I've added a few people to the Hangout, so we're waiting on them to come in. Until then, we can keep powering through.
Okay. Is that somebody that do you have one of these that you want to look for? You want me to look at? One thing that I would also, as we're waiting for somebody to pop up with a question, when I look through the forum, there are a few items that seem to be common misconceptions. So, for instance, one is that treatments are designed because we understand what causes a disorder. So, in other words, if we can treat depression, we understand depression. If we don't understand depression, we can possibly treat it. The reality is that we don't understand any of these disorders at the level that we would want to. Not even something such as Parkinson's. So in Parkinson's, we know that, for instance, the dopamine-containing cells die, but we don't know why they die, and we don't know why the dopamine-containing cells in one part of the brain die and other dopamine-containing cells in another part of the brain don't die. We don't know why they die in some people and not in other people. We simply don't know these things. And can we treat Parkinson's? We absolutely can. We can give a drug that will enhance dopamine function. So the relationship between science, which is understanding the underpinnings of various diseases, and medical treatment, which is an empirical, does it work or doesn't it? The relationship between those two ventures is not one-to-one. And so typically what we do, so let's take let's go back to depression. Depression, we certainly don't understand the biological basis of. We do not understand that. Let me put that affirmatively. We do not understand the biological basis of depression. Nonetheless, there are animal models of depression. So you can, for instance, get rats that will sit in a corner and not do much, not eat much, sleep a lot. They look on the face, they look as though they have depression. Moreover, when we give those rats drugs, they react, they stop looking like they have depression with the same drugs that tend to be effective in human patients. So we call that an animal model of depression. Does it say that the animals are experiencing what we're experiencing, what a depressed person is experiencing? No, it doesn't say that at all. But it is a useful empirical tool. It allows us to test things out on a rodent, and then if it works on a rodent, tested out on patients. But we don't typically understand what gives rise to a neurological condition, and certainly not to a neuropsychiatric condition. Okay, so are we ready with the new question, Emily?
We are still waiting on people to type out their questions. A couple of people are trying to get in Hangout. I would ask that they stop making the attempt because it is messing up the broadcast. April, do you want to give another shot? Peggy, you're muted.
So let me talk about something else while people get ready to ask questions. I think I started this by saying, should people be forced to try anything possible to get themselves out of a depression before it's okay for them, before they have a right to die? And I just want to make clear that, in fact, that's not a realistic possibility. There are all manner of things that you could ask for people to do, and many of them are not. It's simply not possible. So, for instance, when Steve Jobs was dying of, I believe, pancreatic cancer, there were options that were open to him that are not open to another person with pancreatic cancer, because he had a lot of money. So the idea that we can enforce, if governments would choose to enforce this, it would quickly break the bank. So the reality is we don't try everything because we have practical constraints, including financial constraints, on what people can do. And people have access to some care in some countries and to other levels of care in other countries, and some people have access to even more than what their country people have access to because they are personally extremely wealthy. So there are a lot of variables in what we have access to, what we can try in order to treat any kind of disease, not just neurological. Okay, great.
Okay,
so here we have, should I read out April's?
Yeah, go for it, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, it just disappeared on me. Do you have it?
Do you want me to read it? I'll read it out. April's question is about emotional schemas. She says, as someone who deals with living with a personality disorder, sometimes suicidal thoughts, I find myself seeing very different levels of reality at different oftentimes depending on my stress levels. Oftentimes it feels like I have quasi-multiple personalities. One of the challenges I face is in knowing which of these perspectives are valid. How should personality disorders be handled with the right to die? Should there be a democratic committee inside of each person, more of a CEO/board meeting situation? And in a normal person, how many integrated selves would you say a person is made of? And Peggy, I've muted you, so you go for the unmute button.
I think these are great questions. We all are of many minds. I get into discussions with people and they say, but Peggy, you just said exactly the opposite. And I say, well, I totally reserve the right to disagree with myself. And I can have multiple opinions on the same topic. I think many people can. And so who rules? Not only that, but also I'm a different person 10 years ago. I will be a different person in 10 years. But even beyond the 10 years, I'm a different person probably 10 minutes ago, or at least 5 hours ago. We grow, we change continually, and so who gets to hold the reins, so to speak? And the reality is that we do have a place that's a chooser. We have a place that chooses who gets to be the boss inside of our brain. and that is the basal ganglia. So the basal ganglia is what we call an action selector. It's an action selector and a thought selector and a perception selector. It selects from all the various possibilities. It selects one, and the selection that it makes today is not necessarily the selection that it makes tomorrow. But at any one point, the boss will be chosen by the basal ganglia.
Okay, fantastic. We have a question from the Q&A. I'm just going to mute Peggy real quick so to get rid of the echo. The question is, in what ways could the decision-making process be eclipsed by a condition or disorder to the point where the patient would not be considered of sound mind to make a life or death decision? Where would a scientist draw the line? And obviously this is a little more open-ended, but maybe where would you as a neurobiologist draw the line? And you're muted.
I don't think it would not be my choice to draw the line for any other person besides myself. And I don't think that scientists have any particular expertise that would allow them to draw a particularly good line. I think this is a personal choice. And I'm not a big rule person. I'm not. What I think is really useful is for people to talk about this. And I'm just incredibly heartened by the fact that we're having this conversation on a weekend with a bunch of people all over the world, and we're talking about neurobiology. Fantastic. The answer is less important to me. The process, the discussion, that's very, very important.
Okay, we have a question from Rebecca Brooks. There is info in psychology where the brain can be retrained to have more positive thoughts. But the idea is what fires together wires together. Do you believe that the brain can be retrained to shift focus more towards positive and away from negative thoughts? And you'll have to unmute yourself again.
So yeah, my own personal view, and I'm going to couch it always in those terms, because I could be right and I could be wrong, is that there's power to your attitude, to how you come into a situation. I don't know why. Okay, something weird just happened on my screen, but whatever. Okay, so there's a lot of power to how you approach a situation. You can, to a certain extent, greatly influence whether you're going to come out of that situation with result A or result B. So if I go in and I'm asked to say how much I like a picture, and if I'm holding that pencil in my mouth, so I'm prevented from smiling, I am less likely to like that picture than if I go in and with a smile on my face. That's a very robust result, and that's part of embodied emotion. It's part of how we carry ourselves can influence our affect, our emotion, and therefore how we react to certain things. At the same time, there are a great number of things that are outside of our control. And I recently was reading an article saying how, I think it was in the it was in the New York Times, about the idea that thinking positively is such a burden, it's so taxing on the on control systems that quiet negative thoughts and negative feelings, that a person ends up being not particularly helped by it. And whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I can see that I think, for me personally, I try to be open to what my emotions are giving me. I try to be a little less top down and think I should always be happy, I should always be this, that, or the other, and go with where my life leads me. Okay.
We have a comment from Gordon. I'm just waiting for him to get unmuted.
Go, Gordon.
Okay. Hope you can hear me without feedback. I recently finished an Open University here in the UK course on counselling, and one of the interesting processes we learned about, as well as the obvious Freudian stuff, is called cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT. And in there was a famous quote by somebody that talked about catch it, check it, change it. In other words, becoming mindful of the thought patterns we get into in these vicious cycles. And I know some people who are going through this therapy and they found it very helpful. So it's not a question, but I think it is quite interesting that there does seem to be evidence to suggest that, following that earlier question, we can change the way we think about things in a positive way. That's all.
I agree, Gordon, and certainly if I go to a gathering, a party, whatever, thinking I'm going to have a miserable time, I'm pretty likely to have not a great time. If I go expecting, this is going to be really fun, get dressed up, do all the things that increase anticipation, I think the likelihood that I'll have a good time is much higher. So yes, we do definitely contribute to our reality. I think it's also important to remember that there are some things that are outside of our control.
Okay, we have a question from the Q&A. Can a long-term depression lead to dementia? And I'll just add, if so, can we talk a bit about the neurobiology behind that?
Not my area of expertise. I am not aware of a direct line between long-term depression and dementia.
Okay, another question. How would you know that you are suffering from depression even without consulting a clinical psychologist? Is there also a tendency for our brain to trick us into thinking we have depression when we only have prolonged sadness, or the other way around?
Well, I really do think go see somebody. Find out. There's no reason not to go see somebody to check out whether you have depression or not. As far as the line goes between prolonged sadness and depression, it's a murky line. And where to draw it is certainly not within my expertise. I'm not even, to me, as a neurobiologist, it's not particularly clear to me that there is a line. So, for instance, let's say that that this is the degree of sadness, and that if you look at people, there's some distribution so that it goes. Most people don't have much sadness, and then a few people it tails off, and a few people have a lot of sadness, and we call this end of things clinical depression. That's not a very compelling situation that would lead us to think that this is a distinct group. What you would want to see for a distinct group is two different populations. So a bunch of people that have some degree of sadness, and then this other distinct group, and no one in between, or very few people in between. That would lead you to think that depression is a real thing, that it is a distinct state. And I don't know what the data are. I think that I think the line is very difficult, and I'm not sure. And what I'm saying is I'm not sure that there is a line. It's not entirely clear. There's certainly people that are so depressed they need some kind of help in order to make their life tolerable. And there are certainly people who don't need that help. But where that line is, I don't know.
Okay, we have a question. Someone would like to know about pain-related depression. They would like to know more about reticular formations, its functions, relation to back pain, muscle relaxants, acting at the reticular formation. Do you know anything about that in particular?
Well, as it turns out, before I turned my attention to empathy and helping in rats, I actually studied pain modulation. And I studied an area that's part of the raphe, which is the central portion of the reticular core. So the reticular core is a part of the brainstem, mainly the hindbrain, but to a certain extent also the midbrain, and it looks like a net. It looks like a fisherman's net. So it's called reticulated, and it's got some cells in it, and it's got some fibers in it, and they're interspersed. It's not a very dense concentration of neurons. The reticular core has general, which is or widespread effects, which is not to say that it's non-specific. It is not specific. It is just very diverse, and it has effects on all manner of things, including how we process incoming somatosensory information. It has also effects on posture. So you may imagine, how do we know that somebody's depressed? In a lot of cases, we know that they're depressed because the first thing is because they look depressed because they have a posture that looks depressed. And one of the big players in all of this, both how we process sensory information and also how we hold ourselves, is a neurotransmitter called serotonin. And serotonin is present and affects both the cerebral cortex, where our thoughts come, all the depression type things, but it also affects downstream things in our spinal cord about how we hold ourselves and how we process sensory information. One of the lucky things about serotonin is that you can actually you can affect your own serotonin release by moving. So just like Michelle Obama says, just move. So when you move, you release more serotonin. So as far as muscle relaxants go, those are all acting peripherally. They're acting out on muscles. They're not acting on the brain at all. But serotonin, the same neurotransmitter that's going to affect things such as posture and sensory processing, is also going to affect your forebrain. So there are neurons in the midbrain that provide serotonin up to the forebrain and modify forebrain processes, including mood, affect, and thought.
Okay, I think we are all wrapped up then. There were a couple students we tried to invite, and they seem to be having some issues. Unfortunately, we'll have to get you next time because it does not seem to be working. So, Peggy, if you have any closing remarks?
Well, I want to thank everybody. That was fun. You guys asked me challenging questions. Some of them stumped me, and others I had things to say, and I also enjoyed what you all had to say. So let's do it again in a couple weeks. Okay, thanks everybody. Bye.